slide 22. And this is something which is a perennial problem for eager young students, is structure. So this is the S in Oscar, or the first S in Oscars. And again, I've learned this through experience, and quite often it's the best students, the better students, the eager ones, and what they want to do is to write a definitive article. So let's say you've got 1,000 words to play with, and what students do is they start doing the research and doing the writing, tying it all together, and before you know it, you've got 3,000 words, you know? So you've got far too much information. So this is the TMI phenomenon all over again. So you've got too much information from your research, and then you're really eager to get it all down, and the article just becomes a meandering, wandering sequence of facts and figures, and it doesn't really make much sense. So the way to get around this, folks, is to think about your article almost like a building. Like, I don't know whether you or your parents have ever built an extension or a house or anything, but a building starts with an idea, a light bulb moment, and then it starts with a little sketch on a piece of paper. So, you know, if your parents are building an extension, your mum might say, oh, it needs to be about this big and about that wide, and we need to get this in there, and your dad says, well, what about this? And you do a little sketch, and before you know it, you're starting to get an idea of what the final extension will be. So, and then what happens after that is that you'll give your little sketch to an architect, and he or she will go away and do it properly with all those special amazing software that they use. So it's the same with your article. So before you start writing, what you need to do is design it. So sit down literally in front of your laptop, and I'll show you in a moment how to do it. So you design it first, and then you build it. And you may have done this already with essay plans, I think they're called at school, or in your undergrad course, but this is a little bit more sophisticated. So design it and then build it, and what it needs to be is a rational flow. So think about your article, and I always think it metaphorically. You're actually metaphorically holding the hand of the reader and you are guiding him or her through your story. You know, so think about, you know, guiding them down a forest track, and you're the person who knows the way, you're the guide, and your companion is on a voyage of discovery. So you need to help them on their way. You can't just shove them in the forest and say, there you go. You know, you have to sort of show them the way. And the way to do it is to subdivide it. And the way to subdivide it is next slide, number 23, a structure table. So believe it or not, even after all these years of being a feature writer, I worked out I wrote about 400 features, and I've taught it at pretty much every university I've worked at, and I've read loads of features, student features and professional features, and basically I cannot understand how people can write their features without taking this approach, because especially the long ones, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words, you need a structure table, and it will change your life if you can do this. So basically it breaks down in this case the article about English football. So you start with an introduction, and you notice at the end there is a conclusion as well, and in between those 2 points, see if you can break it down into sections, like I said, so that you actually gaze, you guide your reader through the process. And the other thing, if you look closely, you'll notice I've done is I've used word counts. So try and give yourself what I call a budget, a word budget for each section. So if you've got 500 words, generally speaking, 10% for the intro, 10% for the conclusion, which leaves you with, what's that, 400 words for the sections in the middle. But this will actually, I promise you, it will change your life. If you can do this, and you need to be quite strict with yourself, if you can think about what it's going to look like. So this is the sketch that your parents do on the kitchen table before they build their extension, you know. And the other thing this allows you to do is it will give you your shopping list. So it will show you what information you need for each section, and you can move things around depending on how the article flows from start to finish. The writing on there is very small, but if you zoom in later on, you can read it. The next slide is much more legible. So if you look at slide number 24, here's another example of a structure table. So this article is all about journalism ethics, and it's a much longer article. It's 2,000 words here. So you start off by drawing your columns and your rows on your table. Start with an introduction, 200 words, end with a conclusion of 200 words, which leaves you with 1,600 words in the middle. where you really do your analysis. So the introduction, for example, might be, journalists have a bad reputation, and they do. Journalists have a terrible reputation. I think it's only 1 in 5 people in the UK trust journalists. So I put there data. So what that means is it's a hint, a reminder to yourself that you need to find some data to go in there. So the first point you make is journalists have a bad reputation. Add some data. And then I've written this is because. And then you think about, or you find out why it is. It's the lack of trust. Why is the lack of trust? Because of, libelous lawsuits, because of phone hacking, whatever. Then I've put in type in red of journalism. So you could say in celebrity journalism, or football journalism, or financial journalism. And then you can see why, give an example, but it's not being blah, blah, blah. So just by sketching it out, you've already started to develop that narrative. And in the body section, break it down. You can make several points and tie them together as you go along. So journalists are expected to be, this is the normative expectations I spoke about previously. So the qualities of a good journalist, but there are many reasons to doubt their integrity. Give some examples: phone hacking, libel cases. The crucial question is number 3, why does it happen? Why do journalists go down this track of doing disreputable things in the course of their job? And then point number 4, here's the remedial section, what can be done about it? What are the potential solutions? So if you apply some thought to your article like that before you start doing your research, you're going to use your time much more effectively, and you will come up with a much better article. So the question is in the yellow box there. Think about it in terms of what content do you need. Don't think about it in just because the information's available, therefore you'll use it. Think about going around IKEA. Don't just put information in there because it's available. Only put information in if it's relevant, and if it's powerful, and if it adds something to the story. So that's a structure table. Like I said, it will change your life. I'm sure you're familiar with this sort of thing. Essay plans, I know that A-level students do it, and also degree students do it. It's even more important, I think, in journalism, because more people will be reading it, clearly. Okay, so that's research and structure done. Let's move on to content. So again, following the architectural metaphor, taking that a step further, if you think about a structure like the plans, like the design, the piece of paper from the architect that shows what you're going to get, if you think about that as the design, the content is your building materials. It's the things that you actually put in the article that make it stand up, that give it substance. And there's actually, if you analyse articles, as you know that I've done with my PhD and everything else, you look at articles very closely and you take them apart. What are they made of? And when you do content analysis, we'll be talking about this Chris will be talking about it next week in discourse analysis. I'll be talking about it again the week after. When you take an article or a news report on television apart, you'll notice that there are 2 elements. There's research and there's narrative. Research and narrative. So the research are the facts, the figures, the quotes. The facts, the figures and the quotes that the journalist puts into the article. The narrative is the story, is all the other stuff that the journalist uses to tie it all together. So it's the words that journalists sort of wrap around the facts to tell you what happened in the world. So a piece of journalism isn't just Boris Johnson self-isolating, London 2 weeks. That's not the story. There's loads of other stuff that goes around it to make it a compelling human story. So when you write your article, you need to be aware that there's 2 different sorts of content. And when you break it down, it's actually quite scary, because what you find, I've done it with articles that I've written, and I found that only about 20% of an article is actually my words. The rest of it is other people's words. It's quotes from other people, it's facts, it's data, and so on. But just think about it, and also something to avoid, which I'll mention in one moment. Next slide, number 27. When you look at an article, I've done it upside down here. So you start bottom left, where it's the big star, where it says start. So the blue boxes, think about them as bricks. Think about them as bricks. So the blue boxes is research. So in this article, you start with a fact. So the fact might be only 25% of people believe that journalists are honest. The second thing, you might come up with some data, a bit more data. The third thing is content. I put it in context. I put it in a pink box because this is narrative. This is what the journalist writes to make sense of the first 2 points. And then the next point is a second bit of data, and then a bit of analysis, which is also narrative. So what you'll notice is that throughout a good article, it's a combination of research and narrative. Research and narrative. The thing to avoid more than anything else is when it's just research, 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 research. The worst student work that I read, and my heart sinks when I see it, is when students just say fact, 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 data, 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 quote, 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 quote. You must blend in the narrative. So it's your job, holding the metaphoric hand of your reader, to take her through the scary forest of reality. Right? That's the whole point, is that you're there to guide that person. You're there to help her make sense of the world. So you're going to combine research, facts, quotes, data with your own skillful, elegant narrative that ties it all together. And that takes practice. It takes a long time to be able to do that skillfully. But just be aware when you're putting your article together that it should not just be all narrative, and it should not all just be research. It needs to be a combination of the two. And the way that you can get that balance right is by reading a lot of articles for that publication that you're aiming for, to see how other journalists do it, and also read articles on that particular topic. Okay, so I'm just finishing off here with the metaphor. I said bricks and cement. So essentially, the research is like the bricks, and the narrative is the cement that holds it all together. So that architectural metaphor works quite well with articles, because it starts with the structure, it starts with a sketch, and then a more precise design, and then you're using bricks and mortar, bricks and cement to present your work. So that is content. And last but definitely not least, style. Let's talk about the second S. Now, the golden rule with all journalism, doesn't matter which country, it doesn't matter what medium you're talking about, is that you produce journalism for your audience. So, for example, the people that read the Financial Times or the Economist is a very different audience to the people that read OK Magazine or Hello Magazine. Two completely different demographics. So the people that write for the Financial Times have to use the language and the concepts and the ideas that people who read the FT will understand. And likewise, OK Magazine, Hello Magazine, all those chat magazines so-called, they have their own specific style. And essentially, if you break it down, I've suggested here there are 6 essential styles that you should be aware of. There might be more, there could be subdivisions, but this, I guess, is my interpretation of it. So 2 at the top that we're not really interested in with journalism. I mean, they're valid, but they're not really journalistic. Academic, so that's the stuff that you've been reading a lot of, hopefully, in the first couple of months of this term, because this is an academic master's degree. So that's the journal articles, it's the theories, it's the approaches, it's all that sort of stuff. And you'll notice that language is quite dense at times, isn't it? Quite difficult to get your head around, quite difficult to understand. And then you've got literary. So Kate, you might be more familiar with that if you enjoy your creative writing. And so you've got those 2 styles which you're probably quite accustomed to. Journalism itself, believe it or not, can be divided into different styles. So that the bottom style, the style at the bottom, conversational. A classic example here is breakfast television. You know, you think about breakfast television, and normally there's 2 hosts, and typically a man and a woman, and they're sitting on a sofa with cups of coffee in front of them. And the reason they do that is because, believe it or not, they become part of your living room. You know, so they're sitting on a sofa with a cup of coffee, and lo and behold, you're sitting on the sofa with a cup of coffee. And they talk to you in quite a conversational way. And not only that, but the subjects that they discuss tend to be quite light, or quite, dare I say, human interest. You know, tragedies and problems and joys and people being reunited and all that. So that's a very different sort of journalism to, for example, the other one at the other end of the spectrum. I've said broadsheet. So a broadsheet, because they are broad sheets of paper, typically are the quality newspapers. So the Telegraph, the Times, the Guardian, the Financial Times. So that's a very different sort of journalism to the conversational breakfast television journalism. And in between the 2, you've got tabloid. So this is the Sun, the Mirror, the Mail, the Express, the Star. And then you've got TV news, Channel 4 News, BBC News, and so on. So they're kind of in between the two. But if you think about it, each of those different types of journalism have their own characteristics. So slide number 30, and I've put a blue arrow there on the right hand side. So in other words, the higher up this stack you go, the more of the following you actually get. So academic writing has a much larger vocabulary than, say, conversational writing or conversational journalism. Likewise, broadsheet but vocabulary is much bigger than conversational or tabloid. Sentence complexity, if you look at that, have the sort of linguistic characteristics of the work. Sentences tend to be longer the further up that stack you go. Sentence length, obviously. And also abstract concepts. So broadsheets and academics and literary people will talk about things like sort of human rights, you know, which is kind of an abstract concept. Income inequality, you know, racism and that sort of thing. These are kind of abstract concepts. They have real life implications, obviously, but to describe the sort of morality of racism, or the lack of morality of racism, you know, you're going to have to use a lot of words and some quite sophisticated phrasing, and also the further down the stack you go, the further up the stack you go, the fewer colloquialisms, so slang words. Tabloids use a lot of slang expressions, and also I put with a question mark, less humour. You don't find much humour in academic work. Literary work, yeah, it can be quite amusing, I guess, at times if it's a comic novel or something. But the conversational and tabloid, you know, they do have sort of typically quite cheap jokes in those sorts of styles. So just be aware, the key point here is that most journalism falls into those four brackets at the bottom, and each one is different. So you have to use the right vocabulary, the right sort of sentences, the right sort of concepts to make sure that you're serving your readership appropriately. So let me give you an example, slide number 31, and this is a real life story. I found that, and this is honestly true, I found this article in a magazine that I found on the train. I think it was one of those chat magazines, OK, or Heat, or Chat, or whatever it's called. And what I thought was amusing, because I don't usually read stuff like this, but I was flicking through the magazine, and the first thing that struck me was, oh my goodness, really, is this a story? Woman wears flat shoes is a story? But apparently it is a story. It is a story in this magazine, because it appeals to the readership, apparently, of that magazine. So the story is that Victoria Beckham, this is a few years ago, you can see that, I think that's Brooklyn now, he's a full-grown man now, isn't he? The story is that Victoria Beckham goes out, and normally she wears high heel shoes, but amazingly she's now wearing, been seen wearing flat shoes. So what I thought would be good is to compare the same story written in three different styles. So style number one. So what I did is I took that story and I wrote it in a certain style, a different style. So what I wrote, the longitudinal data strongly suggests that Ms. Beckham invariably adopts the post-feminist elegant chic paradigm, even when performing maternal duties. Nevertheless, notable exceptions when less aesthetically complex apparel are employed have been evident throughout Beckham's mediated career. Such incidences surprise popular audiences, and they are subject to widespread and detailed interrogation by commentators and researchers alike. Now, clearly, that is not tabloid. Anybody like to hazard a guess which of those 6 styles that you've just seen, what would that be? I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Anybody? Yeah, it's more academic than broadsheet, I think, Kate. You know, it's got words like longitudinal and aesthetically and paradigm. You know, these are words that only a sad academic would use. No, but there is, I say a sad academic, but you wouldn't... See, one of the reasons why I resisted doing a PhD for so long, because I thought I'd become this sort of person. I thought that's how I would start reading and writing. And I can do it if I need to, as you can see, but I don't like it because I think it excludes a lot of people from the discussion, because it's impenetrable. The language is impenetrable, apart from to academics. So style one is clearly academic. Second one, Exactly the same story. It's not often that you see photographs of Victoria Beckham looking anything other than glamorous, which means, of course, wearing the highest of high heels. But today, the singer, designer, mother of three, and of course, wife of footballing legend David Beckham, shocked the gossip columnist when she stepped out in sensible flat shoes. Our reporter, Samantha Smith, has the details. You know, and I gave it a little bit of tone when I did it, but that's clearly, you know, quite a few steps down from the previous one. So that would be typically breakfast television, wouldn't it? You can just imagine somebody on breakfast television introducing. But it's the key point, folks, is it's the same story. It's the same story. So my point to you is that if you're writing a feature article, make sure that you write it for your audience. So if you're writing for The Guardian, make sure you use Guardian language. Don't make it sound like a tabloid report or a breakfast television report. And don't make it sound like an academic article if you're writing for the Daily Mail, you know. And finally, third example, few women attain the status of true fashion icon. Jackie Kennedy and Coco Chanel were both irrevocably linked to their own signature couture. And in more modern times, some would say that Victoria Beckham has been elevated into this elite club. But yesterday, Miss Beckham chose to bring herself closer to terra firma when she discarded her trademark vertiginous heels and wore a pair of flats. That's kind of, I would say, Guardian. You know, it's kind of, it's trying to be sort of cool and fashionable, and you know, it's evoking sort of fashion icons, Jackie Kennedy, Coco Chanel, which Guardian readers probably means something to Guardian readers. Signature couture, which is a French word meaning, you know, fashion or whatever. And also words like terra firma, which is Latin, which means, you know, the solid ground, and vertiginous. When was the last time you heard the word vertiginous? You know, but you probably or possibly would hear it in The Guardian, vertiginous. People talk about high heels, they don't talk about vertiginous heels, but that's the sort of word. So the key point here, folks, same story, three different audiences, three different styles. So make sure when you're writing your article, you adopt the style. And the way that you adopt it is basically by consuming it. So if you want to be a feature writer for Cosmopolitan or Vogue, you've got to read Cosmopolitan and Vogue every week for a long time. That's how I learnt the style of the magazines I wrote for. So 35, slide 35. So your style, essentially, in shorthand form, what your style needs to be is appropriate, obviously appropriate for the publication. It needs to be precise. What I mean by precise is it's never a good thing to use 5 words when you could say it in 1. You know, and I'll come on to an example of that in a moment. It needs to be concise. Keep it to the point, don't make it ramble, and it needs to be engaging more than anything else. You've got to hold your reader's attention all the way through. So it needs to be the right words in the right type of order. Slide 36, some things to avoid. Sarcasm. Yeah, sarcasm. Can anybody tell me what the problem is with sarcasm, well, in general? What did teachers say to you? Go on, Kate.
When it's written down, they can't tell it's sarcasm.
Exactly. Exactly. No, you've hit the nail squarely on the head. Kate's just said, if it's written down, you can't tell if somebody's being sarcastic. And you see a lot of this on I don't know about Instagram, Facebook, which I use. You see it on Facebook. People, they say, oh, I was being sarcastic. And I'm like, you muppet, you cannot be sarcastic without a tone of, you need a tone of voice, right? You need a tone of voice or a facial expression to make, and you don't get either of those with written words. So just avoid sarcasm completely. Hyperbole, who can tell me what hyperbole is, or hyperbole, however you want to say it?
Exaggerated language.
Exactly, spot on, Catherine. So hyperbole, I remember something, bless her, my mother used to say to me when I was a kid, she'd say, I've told you 1,000 times, you know, and I'd say to her, because I was a cheeky little whatever, I'd say, it hasn't been 1,000 times, Mum, it's only been 6, you know, but that's my mum being hyperbolic. She hadn't told me 1,000 times, but don't do that in articles. Verbosity, anybody? Verbose. If you're verbose, it means just too many words in general. Too many words. Verbosity. And cliches. So let me give you some, you know what cliches are. So some examples on the next slide. So sarcasm, as we know, is a sharp, bitter or cutting expression or remark, a bitter jibe or taunt. But as Kate said, there's no point in doing it in writing because you just can't tell by the written word. Hyperbole, loads of examples here. I'm starving. Starvation is something which leads to death. Somebody says I'm starving in a restaurant. They're not. They're just hungry. It's freezing. Cold temperatures. Freezing is officially only below zero. Verbosity, classic example I always use here. 5 words at this point in time. How would you condense that into one word?
Now.
Yeah, exactly. So use the word now. Don't say at this point in time. People say at this point in time in conversation, but you might say it on a breakfast TV sofa, but you wouldn't say it in a quality piece of writing. And a cliche is a phrase that is overused and betrays a lack of original thought. So at the end of the day, live every day as if it shall last. All this, sort of believe in yourself, kind of self-promotional, motivational stuff. It's a cliche, but there's actually very little substance to it if you scratch the surface. So the way to become, just finishing off now, folks, the way to become a fantastic feature writer, and this is, I can give you classes on all of these 6 elements. I can give you an hour on originality and 2 hours on structure and whatever, and you could sit there and join in and make notes. But the best way of becoming a quality writer, feature writer, is to read it, basically. And some examples here. If we were in class now, I'd actually give you some of my old magazines, because I know your generation doesn't really do magazines because they cost like £5 each. So I don't blame you. But the thing is, you do get some good quality. It's worth it for the quality. So let me make some recommendations. This magazine called The Week. The Week. I don't know if your parents might get it. No? That's a good thing about having parents of my generation, because they do tend to buy paper still. So it's £3.99 a week, which probably, God, that's more than a cup of Costa coffee, isn't it? But you'll get more joy out of this than you will out of a cup of Costa coffee. And the best thing about this magazine is at the back they have this article called The Last Word, and that is a long feature article. And this one was originally printed, it says at the bottom, in The Guardian. So if you get a couple of copies of The Week and have a read of The Last Word, that is a feature article at the back. The other one, and I think some of you, most of you, are interested in politics, The New Statesman is really, really good as well. So this is a left-of-centre magazine. It's been around for about 100 years. And this one is £4.75. So this comes out every week. It's packed with good quality features. The golden rule is wherever you want to direct your journalistic efforts. So if you want to write for Cosmopolitan, read Cosmopolitan. If you want to write for chat magazines, read chat magazines. If you want to write for New Statesman, read the New Statesman. And then you will understand and learn how to write like them. So I could give you, there are a couple of textbooks, but please don't buy them. There's one, I forget the name of it. The author is called Hicks, Hicks, and I read it years ago, and it's not very good. Maybe that's my next mission, is to write a book about how to write feature articles. I don't know, but there's a lack of very good textbooks. The best textbooks are the magazines and newspapers. So just to recap, number 39. Every great feature has those 6 elements, and as I said before, slide 40, if you remember nothing else this week in this session, just remember Oscars. And if you follow that, I think you'll be on pretty safe territory. Make sure it's an original piece of work. Make sure that accuracy underpins everything you do. Make sure it's well structured and logically structured. Use the right content. Don't do too much research. Make sure it's focused research, and write it in the style of your audience that your audience requires. If you do all that, you've got a good chance of success. Any questions? Everybody happy? Banda happy?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's
Okay. So like I said, this is just an introduction. So like I said, I'm not trying to give you the last word on feature writing, but as long as you understand what the difference between a feature article is and a news article, and so long as you understand Oscars, and so long as you understand that to become a really good feature article you've got to read a lot and practice a lot, because it's the same with everything. I wish I could give you shortcuts, but there are no shortcuts really to any of these skills. It's practice, practice, practice. It's everything you do: football, teaching, I don't know, cooking, whatever. It's practice, practice, practice. You can watch as many Gordon Ramsay, Jamie Oliver programs as you like, but until you actually practice making food, you're not going to be able to do it. You know, so you've got to get in there, get your hands dirty, and make some mistakes, and get some feedback, and you'll get there eventually.
Quite similar to creative writing in the sense that when we were writing, you had to read what you were writing. So
Yeah.
I wrote a children's book, so I had to literally spend a month reading children's books, which
Yeah.
was absolutely mind-numbing.
Well, I think, Kate, if you do too much of anything, no, it's the same principle. It's the same with music. You know, if you want to be a musician, you know, if you want to play like, I don't know, Green Day, you've got to listen to Green Day, you know, or whoever it might be, you know, or and it's the same with, yeah, pretty much any artist. Painting, you know, it's the same. There's no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts. But hopefully that's been helpful, and I've videoed it as well, so I'll stick it on online somewhere and keep you all, give you the link. So any more questions before we move on our merry ways? No? Okay, Catherine, Bender, okay?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your time, folks. See you soon. Enjoy the class on Friday with Chris.